The cross. It was meant to horrify the world. It was meant for humiliation. It was meant to last for days. It was meant for slow asphyxiation. It was meant to prolong torture. It was the Roman soldier's job. It was meant to be used by Caesar, but instead, it was used by God. It was meant to stop a movement, but instead, it became the way. It was meant to act on fear, but instead, it awakened faith. It was meant to be vicious and violent, but instead, it became our peace. It was meant to uproot hope, but instead, it became the seed. It was meant to punish captives, but instead, it unleashed freedom. It was meant to build up Rome, but instead, it built God's kingdom. It was meant to discourage rebels. It was meant to stop insurrection. It was meant to put down Jesus, but instead, it set up his resurrection. It was meant to jeer and mock him, but instead it was his glory. It was meant to erase a chapter, but instead it became the story. It was meant to hold up convicts, but instead it raised up a king. It was meant to shut our mouth, but instead it's why we sing. It was meant to be a judgment, but instead it became our mercy. It's why the song of heaven is the Lamb. The Lamb is worthy. It was meant to kill an enemy, crush dissenters and diversion, but instead it became the banner of God's love for every person. It was meant to be appalling, nailing hands and feet to wood. It was meant to be used for evil, but instead it was used for good. It was meant to be a symbol of God's assassination, but instead, it became the symbol of Jesus' invitation. Come to the cross. Instead of sin and stain, you are meant to be made clean. Instead of being forgotten, you are meant to know you're seen. Instead of being ashamed, you can leave behind your guilt. Instead of feeling empty, you were meant to be fulfilled. Instead of being broken, you are meant to be made whole. Here, Calvary is calling. It beckons you. Behold, come to the cross. Instead of being an accident, you have a purpose and a plan. Instead of being abandoned, you were chosen by his hand. For all who've said I can't, God has said I can. No matter what you've done, the invitation stands. Come to the cross. Instead of being doubtful, you are meant to know your Father. You are meant to be his son, and you are meant to be his daughter. You were cherished from the start. You are always in the picture. Instead of being a victim, you are meant to be a victor. The result of Jesus' blood, salvation has arrived. Instead of being dead, you are meant to be alive. The cross. It was meant to signal death, but instead, it's a sign of living. It was meant to be the end, but instead, it's our beginning.
The cross of Jesus. It was meant to be the end, but it was only the beginning. The Bible tells us that the message of the cross is really foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those of us who are being saved by it, it is the power of God. On this Good Friday, we want to take some time and focus on and reflect upon the cross of Jesus Christ. Now, Sunday, we are going to celebrate and remember and focus on the empty grave of Jesus. And we're going to celebrate in a great way. But today, let's focus on the cross. And I want to use a passage of Scripture from Luke chapter 23. And this passage covers the events of the cross. And so listen to Luke's version of the crucifixion. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the King of Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "The King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. The scene of the cross. Usually when we think about the cross, we think at it from a human perspective. And we've seen the Easter cards, we know, with the 3 crosses on a hill, 2 smaller ones with 1 big one in the middle. It's kind of our perspective. But today, instead of seeing a view of the cross, let's consider a view from the cross. I want us to consider Jesus' perspective today. This is something that I personally like to do this time of year, and just to think through and kind of meditate on Jesus' perspective of the cross. And yes, it may be a bit painful for us, but let's see a glimpse of the view from the cross. And I'd like to do that today by pondering 4 questions. Question number 1, what did he feel? What did Jesus feel? Listen to this text. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then wove a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him, and they took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. Notice it doesn't mention that they took the crown of thorns off before they struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him, and then they led him away to crucify him. What did he feel? Physically, it was torture. I mean, he was flogged, he was beaten, he was crucified. Now remember, God chose the way of the cross. God could have chosen any possible way for Jesus to die, but he chose a cross. God chose the cross, not the church, not a preacher. God chose it. He chose one of the most painful, brutal, messy ways for people to die. He chose a very long way to die. Take your thumb and press it into the base of your hand. Nails today are very much different from the spikes that they would have used in Jesus' day. But I one time heard a preacher say that if you take your thumb and press it into your hands, it's very much like the point on the end of a spike that they would have used to crucify Jesus. And so, go ahead and push just a little. Now, every one of us have this built-in thing that if we push too hard, we'll automatically stop. But imagine not stopping. Now remember, he could have. He could have stopped it in an instant. But instead, they began nailing the right hand and then the left. And then they crossed his feet and nailed them through. Then they lifted the cross up and dropped it in the hole. I cringe as I imagine the thud. His body was being held up by 3 points. His knees would have been bent so that you'd have to push up in order to breathe. One commentator said crucifixion is really suffocation. That you'd push up to get a breath and then let back down to take the weight off of your feet and only to find it back on your hands and your wrists. He felt major physical pain. But what did he feel psychologically? We can only imagine. Betrayal, loneliness, burden, sadness. We know that his disciples had all abandoned him. Judas and Peter both betrayed him. Was there bitterness? Surely there was fatigue. He had to be completely exhausted. But what about this? What did he feel spiritually speaking? Because the Bible tells us that in that moment, that God the Father laid on Jesus the iniquity of us all. What did he feel? Let me ask you another question for us to ponder today. What did Jesus see? I can't imagine what he must have felt. I really can't. But what did Jesus see as he hung on the cross? As I think about that, I imagine that he had a hard time seeing anything at all. Because Jesus was prior to being put on the cross, was beaten within an inch of his life. He would have been totally covered in blood and then hung up on the cross in the heat of the day. As the blood began to harden, covering his face, he couldn't wipe it from his eyes. I imagine that he had a hard time seeing anything at all through the blood. But if he could, what did he see? I know one thing he didn't see. He didn't see his friends, because they had all abandoned him. But you know what he did see? He saw soldiers gambling over his clothes. He saw those same soldiers spitting at him and mocking him and laughing at him. He saw a group of Jewish leaders also mocking and laughing, smirking in the shadows. They stood before him smugly, glaring at him from the back of the crowd. The text actually says they were sneering at him, shouting their insults, shaking their heads. He could just see the hate on their faces. What was he seeing? Those soldiers, his missing friends, those angry, hateful Jews. Do you know what he was looking at? He was seeing the very people that he was dying to save. That's what he was seeing. How about this one? What did he hear? If he were to shut his eyes for just a moment, what did he hear? What sounds did Jesus hear on the cross? Laughing, mocking, arguing. If you're the king of the Jews, why don't you do something about this? You can save others, but you can't save yourself. You're not so big now, are you? Remember, he was crucified between two thieves. One was hurling insults at him. The other says, "Excuse me, sir, you on the cross in the middle, could you give me a little help here, please?" He probably heard the gamblers hooting and hollering as they cast lots for his clothes. Do you think that maybe Jesus could hear into the spiritual dimension? Like, did he hear Satan's brood laughing as well? There was at least one more sound. And if the other sounds didn't get him, this one did. Because I'll bet you he heard the weeping of his mother. He heard his mother crying. There were probably many women crying that day, but I'll bet you he recognized his mother's voice. And she was weeping because of him. If you've ever made your mama cry, that'll break your heart no matter how old you are. Let me give you one last question to ponder today. What did he say? As he's on the cross, what did he say? I know what I would have said, and it would not have been very encouraging. It would not have been very sermonic, if you know what I mean. I would have let him have it. I mean, if I had all authority and all power and I was hanging there because of man's foolish cruelty, man, what I would have said. But what did he say? Buckle your seatbelts for this. Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. I tell you the truth. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Father, into your hands, I commit my spirit. And that's it. No ranting or railing, not one angry or bitter word. He could have said some words of punishment and destroyed them on the spot, but he didn't. He could have said just a word and the angels of heaven would have come and stopped all of this suffering, but he didn't. The only other thing he said, it was recorded in Matthew's version, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Have you ever had times of life like that? God, why? Why are you letting this happen to me? I know I've been there, but I got to tell you, that's not where I want to live my life. I want to live my life in the next thing, in the next moment that Jesus has, because he goes on to say, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Jesus is quoting the Old Testament. He's quoting Psalm 31. That phrase, into your hands, it's used throughout the Old Testament. It's used about 20 times, and it's almost always used sort of in a negative way. Genesis 29, for example, God says to Adam, into your hands I give you all of the animals and the fish, and in other words, you can eat them. And he says to Joshua later in the Old Testament, into your hands I give you the Canaanites. Your enemies are going to fall into your hands. Almost every single time in the Old Testament, the into your hands is used kind of in a negative connotation. Now, listen to Jesus. Father, into your hands. See, that phrase means I've fallen, you've got me. But here he combines it with a word that you never find in the same sentence except for in Psalms that he's quoting, and here on the cross when Jesus quotes it. Father, into your hands I commit. Commit means to lay down. This is basically a holy swan dive. Father, into your hands I fall. I trust your hands, Father. My enemies, they think they have me, that I'm going to fall into their hands. But no, Father, into your hands I commit. I lay down my spirit. The cross of Jesus. It was meant to be the assassination of Jesus, but it has been used to give the invitation of Jesus. Come to the cross. And at the cross, you can find peace, and you can find joy, and you can find purpose. And you find that when, just like Jesus at the cross, you say, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Into your hands, Lord, I trust you. I fall into your hands. That's the invitation of Jesus. Come to the cross. The cross, it was meant to be the end, but it was only the beginning, because Friday, it's not the end of the story.
It's Friday. Jesus is praying. Peter's sleeping. Judas is betraying. But Sunday's coming. It's Friday. Pilate's struggling. The council is conspiring. The crowd is vilifying. They don't even know that Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The disciples are running like sheep without a shepherd. Mary's crying. Peter is denying. But they don't know that Sundays are coming. It's Friday. The Romans beat my Jesus. They robe him in scarlet. They crown him with thorns. But they don't know that Sunday's coming. It's Friday. See Jesus walking to Calvary. His blood dripping. His body stumbling. And his spirit's burdened. But you see, it's only Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The world's winning. People are sinning. And evil's grinning. It's Friday. The soldiers nailed my Savior's hands to the cross. They nailed my Savior's feet to the cross. And then they raised him up next to criminals. It's Friday. But let me tell you something. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The disciples are questioning what has happened to their king. And the Pharisees are celebrating that their scheming has been achieved. But they don't know it's only Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. He's hanging on the cross, feeling forsaken by his Father, left alone and dying. Can nobody save him? Oh, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The earth trembles. The sky grows dark. My King yields his spirit. It's Friday. Hope is lost. Death has won. Sin has conquered. And Satan's just laughing. It's Friday. Jesus is buried. A soldier stands guard, and a rock is rolled into place. But it's Friday. It is only Friday. Sunday is a coming.